A freighter carrying a crew of 29 disappeared on Lake Superior during a severe storm last night, and so far, no survivors have been found. The freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves.
Beneath the dark waters of Lake Superior lies a ship that vanished without a trace, the Edmund Fitzgerald. No distress calls, no survivors, just an eerie silence. For nearly 50 years, the mystery of its sudden disappearance has haunted the world. But now, cutting-edge technology has uncovered secrets long buried in the wreckage. Secrets that challenge everything we thought we knew. What truly happened that fateful night?
Sea search is continuing for possible survivors of the Edmund Fitzgerald, a 729-foot ore carrier, which apparently broke apart and sunk.
Beneath the icy depths of Lake Superior lies the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, a ship that vanished without warning nearly 50 years ago.
About one of Michigan's most well-known shipwrecks. People still love talking about the Edmund Fitzgerald and the unanswered questions behind its sinking, so we took a closer look.
The SS Edmund Fitzgerald was not just any freighter. When it was launched in 1958, it was the largest vessel ever built for the Great Lakes, measuring 729 feet in length. Known for carrying taconite iron ore from Duluth to the steel mills in Detroit, the Fitzgerald was a true engineering marvel. Designed and constructed at the Great Lakes Engineering Works, the ship quickly earned a reputation for being strong, efficient, and reliable. Its sheer size and power made it an icon on the Great Lakes, where it would sail through some of the harshest weather conditions in the world.
It was the largest ship to ever sink in the Great Lakes. Resting place is now 530 feet below the lake's surface, allowing only experienced divers with expensive submersible vehicles to visit her.
The ship's appearance added to its allure. With its sleek white superstructure and deep burgundy hull, it stood out among other freighters. Crowds would gather at the ports to watch the Fitzgerald sail by, mesmerized by its graceful, almost regal presence. Families would line the bridges as the ship passed beneath, the sound of its horn echoing across the water like a giant's voice. Newspapers called it the Queen of the Great Lakes, and sailors on other ships referred to it as the pride of the American side. But what set the Fitzgerald apart wasn't just its size or looks, it was the bond between the ship and its crew. The ship had a reputation for speed and efficiency, often breaking cargo delivery records. As a result, it had a loyal crew that sailed with it for years. Many of the sailors had served aboard the Fitzgerald for much of their careers, a rarity in the world of maritime work, where crew members typically came and went. The men who sailed on the Fitzgerald trusted it, and more importantly, they trusted each other. The ship had proven time and again that it was reliable and safe. Captain Ernest McSorley, the last man to command the Fitzgerald, was a seasoned mariner with years of experience navigating the treacherous waters of the Great Lakes. McSorley, known for his calm and composed leadership, was nearing the end of his career when he took command of Fitzgerald. Like the crew members who had served before him, McSorley believed in the ship's strength. He had seen it weather countless storms, and the Fitzgerald had always come through unscathed. In the years leading up to its ill-fated final voyage, the ship had completed over 700 successful voyages, each one reinforcing the idea that it was nearly unsinkable. Life aboard the Fitzgerald wasn't always easy. The Great Lakes, often mistaken for a calm inland sea, could turn violent in an instant. The weather conditions could change suddenly, with violent storms, towering waves, and thick fog that reduced visibility to almost nothing. Yet, despite the challenges, Fitzgerald endured. It weathered fierce storms and ice-filled passages, always returning safely to port. The men aboard the ship grew to believe that no matter the weather, the Fitzgerald would carry them home. It was more than just a ship to them. It was a symbol of reliability and safety. By the fall of 1975, the Fitzgerald was still one of the most respected ships on the Great Lakes. Though its hull showed the scars of years of hard work, the ship's reputation remained spotless. She had never suffered a major breakdown, and she had never lost a crew member in all her years of service. The crew that boarded the Fitzgerald for her final voyage could not have known that it would be their last time sailing aboard her. As the ship left port on November 9, 1975, there was no sign of the disaster that was about to unfold. For all the Fitzgerald's reputation as a strong and reliable vessel, no one could have anticipated what would happen when a ferocious storm descended upon Lake Superior on November 10, 1975. The storm that struck the Great Lakes that night was one of the worst ever recorded. Winds reached speeds of over 70 miles per hour, and waves swelled to more than 25 feet. The Fitzgerald, loaded with over 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, was caught in the midst of the storm, battling against nature's fury. Despite the overwhelming force of the storm, Captain McSorley and Fitzgerald pressed on. The ship stayed in regular radio contact with another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, which was sailing nearby. Together, the two ships fought the storm, keeping each other informed of their positions. Throughout the day, Captain McSorley reported various problems aboard the Fitzgerald: a bad list, a lost vent, and a damaged hatch cover. However, his voice remained calm and reassuring. He was confident that the Fitzgerald could handle these issues, just as it had handled many storms before. But Lake Superior, as the Fitzgerald's crew would soon learn, was merciless. The wind howled louder, the waves grew higher, and the ice began to accumulate on the deck, adding additional stress to the ship's already strained structure. At 7:10 p.m., Captain McSorley made his final transmission to Anderson. His words, "We are holding our own," were the last anyone would hear from Fitzgerald. Moments later, the ship vanished from radar. There was no SOS signal, no distress flares. Fitzgerald had disappeared without a trace, taking with it 29 men and a legacy that would forever be defined by mystery. For the families of the crew members, the silence that followed was deafening. In most shipwrecks, there are last-minute transmissions, desperate calls for help, or flare signals lighting up the sky. But for Fitzgerald there was nothing. Only silence. No one knew exactly what had happened to the ship. All that remained were pieces of debris, floating on the surface of the lake, bits of lifeboats, wreckage, and oil slicks. The Fitzgerald had sunk without a sound, leaving nothing but questions in its wake. The wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was eventually located nearly 530 feet beneath the surface of Lake Superior. The ship's bow was found upright, half buried in sediment, while the stern lay twisted and upside down nearby. The violent conditions of the storm had clearly taken their toll on the ship's structure. Yet, even after the wreck was discovered, questions remained. How could a ship so powerful and reliable sink so suddenly, without warning? Why did it fail to send out a distress signal? How could 29 experienced crew members simply vanish, leaving behind no trace of their final moments? For decades, these questions would remain unanswered. Investigators, historians, and families of the lost crew members would spend years searching for answers, trying to piece together the mystery of the Edmund Fitzgerald. But without survivors or a clear explanation, the tragedy would remain one of the most baffling maritime mysteries of all time. What had happened to the Fitzgerald, and why had it disappeared so suddenly, without leaving any clues behind? These questions would continue to haunt the maritime world for nearly 50 years, until technology finally provided some of the answers. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald's disappearance on November 10, 1975, remains one of the most enduring and perplexing mysteries in maritime history. Despite the fact that the ship had been a symbol of strength and reliability for nearly 2 decades, it vanished without warning, taking its entire crew with it. No distress call, no final signal, no indication of what went wrong, just a complete disappearance that would haunt the families of the 29 men aboard and leave investigators searching for answers for decades. To this day, the story of the Fitzgerald's sinking continues to captivate the public's imagination, with many questions left unanswered. But it wasn't always clear that the ship would become part of this enduring enigma. Fitzgerald's final voyage began on November 9, 1975, when it left Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with over 26,000 tons of taconite pellets bound for Detroit. It was a typical voyage for the Fitzgerald, one it had completed countless times before. The ship had built a reputation for being one of the most reliable freighters on the Great Lakes, regularly breaking cargo delivery records. But on this trip, something was different. Winter had set in on the Great Lakes, and the weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Storms were becoming more frequent, and the temperature was steadily dropping, setting the stage for what would soon become one of the worst storms in the history of the Great Lakes. By November 10th, the storm had intensified into a fierce and powerful system. Winds were howling at over 70 miles per hour, and waves had reached a height of more than 25 feet. The ship, built to withstand rough weather, was struggling against the overwhelming force of nature. Snow and ice lashed against the Fitzgerald's deck, and visibility became nearly non-existent as the storm raged. Captain Ernest McSorley, who had spent years navigating the treacherous waters of the Great Lakes, knew the storm was severe, but remained confident in Fitzgerald's ability to handle it. As the ship battled the storm, McSorley stayed in regular radio contact with another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, which was sailing nearby. The two ships, separated by just a few miles, kept tabs on each other's positions through radar, attempting to navigate the storm as safely as possible. Throughout the afternoon, Captain McSorley reported various problems with the Fitzgerald: a bad list, a lost vent, and a damaged hatch cover. Despite these issues, his voice remained calm and steady. To McSorley, these were manageable problems that could be fixed. Fitzgerald had faced similar challenges in the past, and had always come through unscathed. But the storm continued to worsen, and by nightfall, the conditions were becoming increasingly dire. Waves were crashing against the ship's hull with brutal force, while ice began to accumulate on the deck, adding more weight and stress to the ship's structure. Captain McSorley continued to reassure the crew, telling them that they were holding their own. But as the hours passed, it became clear that Fitzgerald was struggling. By 7:10 p.m., Fitzgerald's final transmission was received by Arthur M. Anderson. McSorley's words, "We are holding our own," would be the last anyone would hear from the ship. Moments after this transmission, the Fitzgerald disappeared from radar, and that was the last known contact with the ship. The storm continued to rage through the night, but Fitzgerald was gone, swallowed by the lake as if it had never existed. There were no last words, no distress flares, and no signal to indicate that the ship was in trouble. The Fitzgerald had simply vanished, taking its entire crew of 29 men with it. In the hours that followed, the Coast Guard scrambled to respond. Helicopters, planes, and ships scoured the storm-tossed waters of Lake Superior, searching for any sign of the Fitzgerald or its crew. But despite their best efforts, no survivors were found. The only evidence of the ship's fate were small pieces of debris, bits of wreckage, lifeboat remnants, and oily streaks floating on the water's surface. The Fitzgerald had disappeared without a trace, and the families of the crew members were left to grapple with the silence. The lack of a distress signal, or any indication of what had happened, only deepened the mystery. In the days and weeks that followed, the Coast Guard and other agencies launched extensive investigations into the cause of Fitzgerald's disappearance. But despite their efforts, there were few answers. The storm was blamed for much of the disaster, but how could a ship that had withstood so many storms in the past succumb to one so suddenly? The questions only multiplied. How had a ship that had been regarded as nearly unsinkable gone down so quickly, and without warning? Why had Captain McSorley, known for his calm and experienced leadership, failed to send out a distress signal? And why, with such a skilled crew, and a vessel that had endured over 700 successful voyages, had the ship suddenly vanished into the night? The wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald was eventually located in the icy waters of Lake Superior. nearly 530 feet below the surface. The ship had broken into two parts, with the bow standing upright, half buried in the lake bed, and the stern twisted and upside down. The condition of the wreck bore witness to the ferocity of the storm and the violence with which the ship had been torn apart. But even with the wreck located, the mystery of Fitzgerald's fate remained unsolved. The ship had not sent out a distress call, and no survivors had been found. The cause of the sinking was still unclear, and questions continued to swirl around the circumstances of the ship's disappearance. For nearly 50 years, the Fitzgerald sinking was the subject of debate, speculation, and investigation. The Coast Guard's initial conclusion, that the ship's hatch covers had failed during the storm, was widely accepted, but also met with skepticism. While it was plausible that the hatch covers had failed, many believed that there was more to the story. Families of the crew members, in particular, were outraged by the suggestion that the ship's crew had been negligent. Captain McSorley was known for his meticulous attention to detail, and many felt that blaming the crew for failing to secure the hatch covers was unfair. They believed that there must have been another explanation for the Fitzgerald's sudden and catastrophic sinking. As the years went on, alternative theories were proposed. Some suggested that the Fitzgerald had struck an uncharted shoal and torn its hull open. Others speculated that a rogue wave, an enormous towering wave, had struck the ship and overwhelmed it. There were even those who believed that the ship had been sabotaged. But despite the many theories, none could explain the events of November 10, 1975 with certainty. It wasn't until decades later, with the advent of new technology, that a clearer picture began to emerge. The initial sonar scans and footage taken by submersibles in the 1980s were grainy and unclear. The findings, while intriguing, were inconclusive. Fitzgerald's hull had been found split in two, with the bow and stern lying at different points on the lake bed, but the images didn't offer enough detail to make a definitive conclusion. As the years passed, the mystery seemed to fade, and the questions about the Fitzgerald sinking became more about memory than about answers. However, it was the introduction of artificial intelligence and advanced underwater drone technology that would finally begin to unlock the secrets of the Fitzgerald. Armed with AI-assisted drones and high-powered cameras, researchers were able to map the wreck with unprecedented accuracy. These new tools allowed them to examine the ship's condition in minute detail, revealing clues that had previously gone unnoticed. For the first time, the wreck could be studied not as a blurry silhouette in murky water, but as a detailed and accurate reconstruction of the ship. The AI-enhanced scans showed Fitzgerald in a new light, and what they revealed was both surprising and alarming. Clamps that were supposed to be securing the cargo holds were found to be missing, corroded or bent, allowing water to flood the ship. A vent pipe, which should have been sealed, was completely sheared off, leaving a direct path for water to enter the cargo hold. These discoveries suggested that the ship had been taking on water at a rate that had gone unnoticed by the crew. The discovery of these issues changed everything. What had once been an unexplained disaster now had a clear cause. The Fitzgerald had sunk because its cargo holds had been compromised long before the final storm hit. The ship's hatches, which were supposed to be tightly secured, had failed, allowing water to pour in and destabilize the vessel. The storm, while intense, had merely been the final trigger in a chain of events that had begun long before the Fitzgerald ever set sail. But as the new evidence emerged, it didn't bring closure. Instead, it opened up a new set of questions. How had these weaknesses gone unnoticed for so long? Why hadn't the ship's design been improved? And why had it taken nearly 50 years to uncover the truth about what happened that night? The discovery of Fitzgerald's final moments raised unsettling truths about the ship's construction and the potential flaws in other freighters built during the same era. It cast a shadow over the legacy of the Great Lakes freighters and highlighted the vulnerabilities that had been hidden beneath the surface for decades. And for the families of the 29 men who perished on that fateful night, the answers, while enlightening, could never erase the pain of the loss. Fitzgerald's story, with its mix of mystery, tragedy, and revelation, is far from over. The answers may have been uncovered, but the questions will continue to linger, casting a dark cloud over the legacy of a ship that was once the pride of the American side. The mystery surrounding the disappearance of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald began almost as soon as the ship vanished beneath the waves of Lake Superior. In the immediate aftermath, investigators and the Coast Guard scrambled to understand what had happened to the ship, but there were few clues to follow. The lack of survivors and the absence of a distress signal made the task all the more difficult. With no direct evidence from the crew, and no clear explanation of why the ship went down, the sinking of the Fitzgerald quickly became one of the greatest maritime mysteries in history. What followed in the decades after the tragedy was not just an investigation into what happened that night, but a wide-ranging debate filled with competing theories, official reports, and lingering suspicions. In the years following Fitzgerald's disappearance, the United States Coast Guard conducted a formal investigation into the cause of the sinking. Their findings were published in a report in 1977, which concluded that the Fitzgerald had sunk due to the failure of its hatch covers. According to the Coast Guard, the ship's massive steel hatches, which were designed to keep water out of the cargo holds, had either been torn loose by the force of the storm, or were improperly secured. This allowed water to flood the forward holds, causing the ship to lose its buoyancy. The result was a gradual sinking that overwhelmed the ship before it could send out a distress signal. At first glance, this explanation seemed reasonable. The storm that struck the Great Lakes on November 10, 1975, was unprecedented in its ferocity, with winds gusting to more than 70 miles per hour and waves reaching over 25 feet. Given the intensity of the storm, it was plausible that the hatch covers, which were designed to withstand rough weather, could have failed under such extreme conditions. If the holds had flooded, the Fitzgerald would have quickly lost stability, eventually sinking. However, while the Coast Guard's explanation made sense on the surface, it didn't sit well with many people, particularly the families of the 29 men who had perished on board. The families of the lost crew members were outraged by the Coast Guard's conclusion. To them, the suggestion that the Fitzgerald had gone down because of a failure to properly secure the hatch covers seemed to unfairly place the blame on the ship's crew. Captain Ernest McSorley, who had commanded the Fitzgerald for years, was known for his calm, experienced leadership. He was considered a veteran mariner who had weathered many storms, and the idea that he and his crew had failed to properly secure basic safety features felt like an insult to their professionalism and memory. McSorley was not a man who would have been careless when it came to securing the ship's cargo holds, and the crew was equally experienced and disciplined. Many felt that the Coast Guard's explanation oversimplified the issue and suggested negligence where none had occurred. For the families, it was easier to believe that the ship's sinking had been caused by something beyond the control of the crew. Some speculated that the Fitzgerald had suffered from a catastrophic failure in its structure. Perhaps years of pounding through storms and carrying heavy loads had weakened the ship's steel hull, making it vulnerable to the extreme weather conditions of the storm. Others believed that the ship had struck an uncharted shoal or reef, tearing its hull open and causing it to sink. While these theories lacked the official backing of the Coast Guard's report, they were given a great deal of attention and had strong support from those who felt the crew should not be blamed for the tragedy. The National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB), which also conducted an investigation into the Fitzgerald sinking, offered an alternative theory. In their report, the NTSB suggested that the Fitzgerald might have suffered a structural failure. The board speculated that the ship's steel hull could have fractured due to the immense forces exerted on it by the storm's high waves and strong winds. Over the course of nearly 2 decades of service, the Fitzgerald had endured numerous storms, and the NTSB suggested that these conditions could have weakened the ship's structure. Under the combined pressure of the hurricane-force winds and towering waves, the Fitzgerald may have snapped apart, causing it to sink almost instantly. While the structural failure theory had its supporters, it was still not definitive. Some experts suggested that the ship's construction might have been faulty from the start, while others argued that the ship had simply been overwhelmed by nature's forces. The NTSB's theory was more palatable to many who were unwilling to believe that the crew had been at fault. However, without any survivors or clear evidence to support it, the theory remained speculative, and questions continued to arise. In the years that followed, more theories were put forward, with each one offering a different explanation for Fitzgerald's disappearance. Some experts believe that the ship had been hit by a rogue wave, a freak occurrence where a massive towering wave unexpectedly overwhelms a ship. These waves, which can reach up to 100 feet in height, are notoriously difficult to predict and can strike with little warning. Others argued that the ship had struck an uncharted shoal, which had torn open its hull and caused it to sink. These theories, while plausible, were difficult to prove, especially without any survivors or physical evidence to support them. Despite the many competing theories, one thing was clear: Fitzgerald's sinking remained an unsolved mystery. The ship's wreck had been located on the floor of Lake Superior in 1978, 3 years after the ship had gone down. The bow of the ship was found upright, half buried in sediment, while the stern lay twisted and upside down nearby. However, the initial scans and footage taken of the wreck were grainy and unclear. The images produced by the submersibles did not reveal enough detail to make any definitive conclusions about what had happened. As time went on, the debate over Fitzgerald's sinking became less about solving the mystery and more about personal memory and national pride. For some, Fitzgerald had become a symbol of the strength and resilience of the American industrial era. For others, it was a reminder of the dangers of the Great Lakes, which, despite their beauty, are known for their unpredictable and deadly storms. Over time, the theories surrounding the ship's sinking began to take on a life of their own, with families, historians, and maritime experts all holding on to their own versions of events. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, efforts to explore the wreck had been largely limited to small expeditions and sonar scans. The technology available at the time was far from perfect, and the footage produced was often unclear and difficult to interpret. It was clear that the wreck of the Fitzgerald held many secrets, but the technology of the time wasn't advanced enough to uncover them. Theories continued to circulate, but no one could say for sure what had caused the ship to sink so suddenly. It wasn't until the advent of new technology, including AI-assisted drones and high-resolution underwater cameras, that the mystery of the Fitzgerald sinking began to unravel. The introduction of these advanced tools provided researchers with the clarity they had been lacking for decades. With the ability to map the wreck in unprecedented detail, investigators were able to uncover new evidence that had remained hidden in the ship's structure for nearly 50 years. For the first time, the wreck could be studied as a detailed millimeter-accurate reconstruction, offering new insights into what happened to the ship that fateful night. With the new technology came a new understanding of Fitzgerald's demise. The AI-assisted scans revealed that the ship's cargo hatches had been compromised long before the final voyage. Missing or damaged clamps, torn vent pipes, and other signs of wear and tear suggested that the Fitzgerald had been slowly taking on water during the storm. This discovery cast doubt on many of the earlier theories, including those suggesting that the ship had been sunk by a rogue wave or a structural failure. Instead, the evidence pointed to a much more gradual process. The Fitzgerald had been overwhelmed by water pouring into its holds, weakening the ship's stability until it sank. This revelation not only answered some of the questions surrounding the Fitzgerald's sinking, but also raised new ones. The scans showed that the ship's hatch covers and vent pipes had been in poor condition long before the final voyage, raising concerns about the maintenance and inspection of ships from that era. Could the sinking have been prevented if the ship had been better maintained or if its design had been updated? Was the Fitzgerald simply the victim of time, or had its flaws been overlooked by those responsible for its safety? These questions would continue to haunt the maritime world, even as the mystery of the Fitzgerald sinking seemed to be solved. In 2023, nearly 5 decades after the SS Edmund Fitzgerald sank into the cold depths of Lake Superior, technology finally offered a breakthrough in the investigation. The ship, once a symbol of strength and pride on the Great Lakes, had been reduced to an enigma, its wreckage a haunting reminder of a mystery that had baffled experts for years. No one had ever truly understood why such a massive and respected vessel, under the command of an experienced captain, could vanish without a trace. For years, theories had circulated, and investigations had been conducted, but the truth had remained elusive. But in 2023, the advent of artificial intelligence, underwater drones and high-definition imaging technology allowed for a new examination of the wreck, an examination that would finally answer some of the most pressing questions. The mission began with the deployment of a state-of-the-art remotely operated vehicle, ROV, which was equipped with advanced AI-assisted navigation and high-resolution cameras. This was not the same technology that had been used in the early days of the investigation. In the past, sonar scans and submersibles had produced grainy, unclear images of the wreck which left much to the imagination. But the new AI-powered technology allowed investigators to map the wreckage with incredible precision, creating detailed 3D models of the ship's condition. The team was now able to explore the Fitzgerald's wreck like never before, capturing every detail with millimeter accuracy. The wreck, which had been hidden for decades beneath the murky waters of Lake Superior, was about to reveal its secrets. The initial descent of the drone into the depths of the lake was a moment of intense anticipation. The Fitzgerald had been resting at a depth of 530 feet, and its wreckage was half buried in sediment. As the drone's floodlights illuminated the darkness, the first clear images of the ship began to emerge from the gloom. The bow of the ship was visible, upright, and standing tall, though covered in decades of silt. The ship's stern, however, lay twisted and inverted a short distance away. The images captured by the drone painted a stark picture of the Fitzgerald's violent end, with twisted steel and mangled sections of the ship's hull testifying to the force of the storm that had sunk it. But it wasn't just the ship's external condition that captured the investigators' attention. It was the details that the AI-enhanced scans revealed. The Fitzgerald's hull, which had once been a symbol of strength and resilience, now appeared eerily vulnerable. As the drone moved along the bow, investigators began to notice something alarming. The ship's cargo hatches, which were crucial to keeping the ship watertight, were in poor condition. Many of the clamps that were supposed to secure the hatches were either missing, corroded, or bent out of shape. These clamps were essential for keeping water out of the ship's cargo holds, but they were no longer functioning as they should. In some areas, the clamps appeared to have been damaged long before the final voyage, suggesting that the Fitzgerald had been taking on water at a slow but steady rate, long before the storm ever hit. The findings were unsettling. The hatches were designed to keep water out during rough conditions, but without the proper seals in place, the Fitzgerald had become vulnerable to the very thing it had been designed to withstand. The storm that had struck the ship had certainly been fierce, but the failure of the hatches had allowed water to enter the ship at an alarming rate. Investigators quickly realized that Fitzgerald's final moments had been much different from what anyone had previously imagined. Rather than being overwhelmed by a single catastrophic event, the ship had slowly flooded, its cargo holds filling with water before it finally sank. This revelation cast the disaster in a new light, offering a much clearer explanation of what had happened that night. But the discoveries didn't end there. The AI-powered drone continued to capture more detailed images of the wreckage, uncovering additional problems with the Fitzgerald structure. As the drone moved along the ship's deck, it uncovered a shocking discovery. A vent pipe that should have been securely welded into place had been completely sheared off. This hole, just a few inches in diameter, created a direct pathway for water to pour into the ship's cargo hold. The implications of this were devastating. While the missing clamps were troubling enough, the vent pipe's destruction added a new layer of vulnerability. Water could enter the ship through this opening, further destabilizing the Fitzgerald as the storm raged on. What began as a simple exploration of the wreck had quickly turned into a groundbreaking investigation into the true cause of the Fitzgerald's sinking. With the AI system providing real-time analysis of the wreck, it became clear that the ship had been compromised long before the storm hit. The missing clamps and the damaged vent pipe suggested that the Fitzgerald had been taking on water at a much faster rate than anyone had realized. The ship's ability to withstand the storm had been seriously compromised, and by the time the crew realized what was happening, it was already too late. The findings were shocking in their clarity. The Fitzgerald had not been sunk by a freak wave, nor had it been the victim of sabotage. The ship's sinking had been the result of a slow, steady accumulation of water, which had gone unnoticed by the crew until it was too late. The storm, which had seemed to come out of nowhere, had only acted as the final trigger in a chain of events that had been set in motion long before the ship set sail. The Fitzgerald had not been overwhelmed by a single catastrophic event. It had slowly, almost silently, sunk beneath the waves, its crew unaware of the danger until it was too late. For the families of the 29 men who perished that night, the revelation was both a relief and a source of pain. On one hand, the new evidence cleared the crew of any wrongdoing. For years, many had speculated that Captain McSorley and his crew had failed to secure the hatches properly or had been negligent in their duties. But the new findings proved that this was not the case. The crew had not failed. They had been fighting a losing battle against a ship that was silently taking on water. The Fitzgerald had been compromised long before the storm, and there had been nothing the crew could have done to prevent its sinking. But while this new evidence provided some closure, it also raised more questions. How had Fitzgerald's maintenance been allowed to slip? Why had the hatches and vents been in such poor condition when the ship left port? Had there been any warnings or signs that the ship was not as seaworthy as it appeared? The questions were uncomfortable, but they were necessary. The Fitzgerald's sinking had not been an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of ships from the same era that had been built without adequate safety measures. The Fitzgerald had been a victim of its time, built to withstand the challenges of the Great Lakes, but lacking the necessary safeguards to prevent such a disaster. The implications of these discoveries were far-reaching. The vulnerabilities uncovered in the Fitzgerald's design raised serious concerns about other ships of the same era. If the Fitzgerald had been allowed to sail with such critical flaws, how many other ships were sailing with similar vulnerabilities? Were there other ships out there still in operation that had similar problems with their cargo hatches or vent pipes? The revelations about the Fitzgerald's sinking sent shockwaves through the maritime industry as experts began to question the safety standards of vessels built during the mid-20th century. But the biggest question of all was whether the disaster could have been prevented. If the Fitzgerald's hatches had been properly maintained, if the vent pipe had been securely fastened, could the ship have survived the storm? The answer, as it turned out, was yes. The Fitzgerald's sinking was not the result of a freak accident or an unavoidable disaster. It was the result of neglected maintenance and overlooked vulnerabilities. With better oversight, the ship's design could have been reinforced, and the disaster might have been avoided altogether. Fitzgerald's story, with its tragic ending and its long history of unanswered questions, serves as a cautionary tale for future generations. It is a reminder that even the strongest ships can be brought down by hidden weaknesses, and that sometimes the most dangerous flaws are the ones we cannot see. The AI-assisted drone scans may have finally revealed the truth behind the Fitzgerald's sinking, but they also uncovered a larger problem within the shipping industry. The disaster was not an isolated event. It was part of a broader pattern of negligence and oversight that had compromised the safety of many ships. Fitzgerald's legacy then is not just one of tragedy, but of a warning. As the industry continues to evolve, the lessons learned from the Fitzgerald's sinking should serve as a reminder of the importance of maintaining and inspecting ships to prevent similar disasters in the future. Fitzgerald's sinking may have been a preventable tragedy, but it has also become a symbol of the dangers that lie beneath the surface, both in the waters of Lake Superior and in the ships that sail upon it. As the wreck's secrets continue to unfold, the hope is that these lessons will not be forgotten and that the mistakes of the past will not be repeated.
Edmund Fitzgerald's final secret, uncovered by AI technology, may have answered some of the lingering questions, but it also leaves us with a deeper understanding of the risks we face when we fail to address the vulnerabilities that lie hidden within the systems we trust.